Oh, thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you for that nice introduction. So, today we are going to talk about animals and animals that we eat, but we're going to focus in on an animal that doesn't get a whole lot of attention, and that is fishes. Uh, when we think of fish and in these contexts with food, oftentimes we're talking about environmental impacts, health impacts, and I am going to talk about those things. But I also want to talk about the fish, the individual fish. We rarely get to experience their world, think about them as the individuals that they are. So we're going to kind of delve into all of that today and talk about fishes. And I even got a little bit of a fish image for us to meditate on as well, to bring them in to our conversation today. So so fish, and I'll say you can use the term. Often people ask me, well, why do you say fishes sometimes? Because it's not often heard. Both terms can be used for when you're talking about numerous fish, for fish plural. But technically, one species of numerous fish, you would say fish. For numerous species, like the fish in the ocean, it's actually fishes. That's kind of the proper term technically to say. So, but they can be interchangeable. So I may say fish or fishes, depending on the situation, but that's just a little interesting tidbit that one species of multiple fish is fish, to multiple species, it's fishes. Okay. So, fish are our direct evolutionary ancestors. They were the first life on Earth, the first vertebrates on Earth. And they really are our true ancestors. But because they live in the water and they don't have really a need for extensive facial movements or eyelids or expressive mouths or anything like that, when you're in the water, they don't really have a use for that. So oftentimes they're falsely perceived as being simple or unfeeling or primitive, unable to experience pain, unable to experience emotion. And this has kind of been our perception of fish for a very long time, for hundreds of years. But science is actually debunking all of this as we speak. The scientific information that has been coming out in the last 2 decades has really been fascinating, just amazing, around fishes' abilities and their cognitive abilities, their emotional abilities, and also if they feel pain. And that's what I want to start with. Do fish feel pain? Okay, actually, I want to get my PowerPoint going. So let's share screen and get that going. All right, here we go. All right, so sentience in the sea. Let's talk about the sentience in the sea. So I'll start by just introducing this book. This is a wonderful book called What a Fish Knows by Jonathan Balcombe. I highly recommend it. He has done extensive research into the scientific studies that have been done over the last couple of decades, like I was just talking about, and has compiled those studies in this book. And a lot of what is in this presentation comes from this book. So I highly recommend it. And I want to start with, do fish feel pain? Because, it's a very important aspect to the bigger question that we're really asking, which is, should we kill and eat fish, right? That's really the bigger question here. And, and a lot of people do believe that fish don't feel pain. And I'll give a quick story here from my childhood. When I was a little girl, I went fishing with my father, like many, many other children in the US. We go fishing with our fathers. It's a rite of passage. And my dad and I are fishing, I think on a dock. I don't remember us being in a boat, but anyway, there was a fish that got caught on one of our lines. I think it was mine. And my dad started helping me to reel the fish in. And there was this struggle, and the fish is fighting for his life. And we bring the fish onto the deck, and the fish is just flopping around and in such distress. And my face must have been in equal distress seeing this, because my dad kept saying to me, "Oh, don't worry, they don't feel pain. They don't feel pain. This is just reflexes that you're seeing. They don't feel pain." And I remember in my little 8-year-old brain thinking, wow, Dad, I think you might be wrong, you know. But of course, that's what his father told him, and it's what most people believe. But I had an inkling that this might not be the case. And since I followed the path I did of researching and investigating animals, and farmed animals in particular, and animals that we kill for food, I have now since learned a great deal about how fish actually do feel pain. It has been scientifically pretty much concluded, as far as science concludes. You know, they're always the 99%, but concluded that fish do feel pain. And I will say so both physiologically and behaviorally. There's been numerous studies now that it's been extensively studied. And every time it comes out that they do seem to have the same, okay, so they have the same neurons that to detect harm, right? So that humans, mammals, avians all do. So high temperatures, pressure, things like that. When injured, fish produce the same naturally occurring opioids that mammals do to relieve the pain, right? We have these naturally occurring opioids that can come through the intensity of the pain. When injured, the activity in the brain of fish is actually equivalent to that of land mammals. There's a cascade of electrical activity that rushes not only to the hindbrain and brainstem, and those are the parts of the brain that are responsible for reflexes, right? To react to the pain physically. But also there is electrical activity in the brain that is in the regions for conscious sensory perception, meaning that they are perceiving the pain. So they certainly feel pain. And, you know, I'm not going to go into the details of the studies. There was horrible, extensive, terrible things that they did to these poor fish to find these things out. And I'll give a bit of a disclaimer that I, you know, certainly don't condone research in this way on any animal. But since these studies were done, I feel that actually it's an obligation to share them now, so that we can gain empathy for these animals, to learn that they are feeling this pain, perceiving pain. And also behaviorally, that's another way that they can determine or detect if they feel pain. And fish react the same way that every other animal reacts behaviorally to when pain is introduced. You know, they cease normal activity. They may rub the affected area. They can maybe thrash around, rocking from side to side, laying still at the bottom of their tank. That's, you know, or the ocean, but at their tank in these studies. And when painkillers are given, when they're given morphine or other painkillers, then their regular behaviors may come back a bit. So, you know, so the conclusions have found that absolutely they respond to a variety of different painful stimuli: burning, cutting, stabbing, chemical damage, acid burning, both physiologically and behaviorally. So fish consciously experience pain. And it's more and more being recognized by large scientific bodies. They're taking notice of all this science. And the Smithsonian Institute said the collective evidence is now robust enough that biologists and veterinarians increasingly accept fish pain as a reality. And then this was interesting. This was from the American American Veterinary Medical Association. And they published new guidelines on euthanasia, and they brought fish into their euthanasia guidelines, saying Suggestions that finfish respond to pain merely represent simple reflexes, Dad, has been refuted. The preponderance of accumulated evidence supports the position that finfish should be accorded the same considerations as terrestrial vertebrates in regard to relief from pain. So, unequivocally, yes, fish feel pain. So now that we know that and we've established that, we can look at more interesting things, and science is doing that. They're moving on to, do fish have, what is their life like? What is their brain? What's happening in their brains? What is their cognitive ability? What are their emotions? And the science here is just fascinating as well. So, from a neurophysiological perspective, fish have the functional equivalent of a limbic system and other nervous systems that are linked to emotion and emotional learning. So they have that same part of the brain as well. So we know that there are these parts of the brains that are specific to emotion in fish. Science has discovered that fish are sentient, they are aware, they are communicative, they're social, they can be virtuous, they can be mischievous. There's all these wonderful stories of these different ways that fish have these different personalities and little things that they have done. They can use tools in different situations. They can solve problems, solve puzzles. It's amazing what we've learned. And they play. They engage in object play, solitary play, social play with each other, interspecies play with other species. So these are all signs of complex cognitive function. And they have preferences too of who they want to spend time with, who they want to partner with, what foods they want. Even in the same species of fish, there may be different preferences for different foods, things like that. And communication. So because fish don't have ears, it was thought for a long time, it was just assumed for a long time that they didn't hear or make noise. And this is not the case at all, because we don't have the same ears to detect the sounds that they make in the air. I mean, we have different hearing capabilities. So now that there's underwater sound detecting equipment that's a lot more sensitive, we now know that they have a range of acoustic sounds that they're making, and that their bodies can produce sounds and can perceive sounds. So they are communicating with each other. They have language. So parenting, this was very interesting to me when I learned about this. You know, most people believe that fish just lay eggs and go away and the babies hatch and kind of fend for themselves. And that is the case with some species of fishes. But there's numerous species actually that offer parenting, protection, caregiving to their offspring. Some fish have live birth as well. The cartilage fish, sharks and rays have live birth. And then the egg laying in fishes can be really extremely complex. There's just elaborate ways that they protect both their fish and their offspring. Some fish can construct these different little nests and shelters with sand or other materials, plant materials. Some fish can create these little bubble rafts. They create these little rafts around the eggs that protect and float the eggs. And some parent, like this fish we see here, and sometimes the mouth of the mom is the protective area. So the mouth will open. You might have seen this on video. Mouth opens and all the little fishes go bloop, 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 when there's danger in the area, a predator in the area. And they go into the mom's mouth, sometimes the dad's mouth, and are protected. And both genders, can be involved in the parenting. Of course, seahorse dads are famous for keeping the babies safe in a pouch until they're ready to be hatched. So I thought that was really fascinating when I learned about all that there's all this parenting and caregiving going on with fishes. And let's go back one. And wolf eels mate for life. I found this fascinating as well. Wolf eels are these beautiful eels that you see here. I think they're beautiful. And there was a wonderful part of a documentary that I saw on wolf eels where they find their cave and they, mate for life with their little mates in the cave. And they had all these images of them caressing and cuddling in their caves together that I thought was very sweet. So there's again, so much scientific information now around awareness and emotion. Okay, so memory is one of those things. It's another place where, just like the myth that they don't feel pain, there's this myth that they don't have a long memory, like that a goldfish, there's all these tropes in cartoons and things like that, where a goldfish, is surprised every 3 minutes or 3 seconds or whatever, because they didn't remember what just happened. Or that's so just our perception of and misunderstanding. Absolutely, they have memory. They have very long-term memory, and and there's just behavioral things that we've learned that prove this. So I would think, obviously, they will often avoid an area where they've been attacked. Like, they were attacked by a predator and survived, they will avoid that area like it's a bad memory. They don't want to go back to that area. They can learn and remember puzzles and mazes. And even when they've figured out a puzzle to get through and are taken out of that situation for months and brought back, they'll remember that puzzle and go straight through instead of having to relearn it after months. So, and migrating fish, I mean, just thinking about migrating fish that are born in a, deep inland in a stream and fresh water in a tributary, and then make their way out to sea, go miles and miles in the ocean, and then are able to somehow make their way back through all the different options and miles of tributary back to their home spawning ground where they were born, years ago or months ago, or well, be years ago. So a year ago sometimes. So they're able to lay their eggs there. So of course they have memory, they remember where that was. Touch is another interesting thing. Fish are highly sensitive to touch, and tactile connection can really enrich their lives. Many fish court each other with gentle nubbing or rubbing or nipping at each other and their little bodies. There's lots of videos of fish wanting to be petted, people putting their hands in the water and the fish coming up to be touched, fish swimming around people's hands, getting stroked and touched, and also accounts from divers having interactions with fish touching them. Not all fish want to be touched. Again, this is individual, so it's not going to be all of them. And I will also say that if you are diving, to always please not come upon fish or go up and kind of force or try to engage with touching them. Let them come to you. Of course, be sure that they want to be touched. All right. So learning is another interesting area. And so I'm going to give another disclaimer here and say that intelligence should never be a factor in whether we protect an animal and whether we exploit an animal and whether we breed and kill an animal. Intelligence shouldn't really even come into the picture. That should not be a gauge for how we, treat an animal. Those things should be the factors there should be: do they feel pain? Can they suffer? Do they feel fear? Things like that, their emotional states. That's where we should be looking to as to whether or not to exploit an animal. But with that said, there's been some really interesting studies about intelligence in fish and learning with fish. And one, they did an experiment with fish, and they did the same experiment with numerous animal species, I believe, and monkeys as well. Some different species of monkeys. And how the experiment goes is there were two plates of food, a blue plate and a red plate. And if so the animal would come into the situation with two plates of food to choose from. If they started eating on the red plate, then the blue plate would stay and they would get both plates of food. But if they started eating on the other plate, the blue plate, then the red plate would be taken away at each time. So it was kind of a learning experience. They had to figure it out. It was a puzzle. If they started with one, then the other would stay. If they started with the other, one would get taken away. And of course, we want both plates to stay. We want all the food, right? So, interestingly, they did this same experiment with capuchin monkeys, orangutans, chimpanzees, and fish. Guess who figured it out the fastest? Fish. Fish figured it out faster than all the species of monkeys. It took them about 45 tries to figure it out. The monkeys took double that time to figure it out, and the chimpanzees never did quite figure it out. So it kind of like flips what we think we know about fish on its head, right? We think that they are simple and that certainly a monkey would test higher on some kind of puzzle or learning experience. No, not necessarily. And in Jonathan Balcomb's book that I mentioned at the beginning, What a Fish Knows, here's a quote from the book about this study. He said, "When fishes outperform primates on a mental task, it's another reminder of how brain size, body size, presence of fur, feathers, or scales, and evolutionary proximity to humans is wobbly criteria for gauging intelligence." So, interesting stuff. And the last one I'll talk about kind of in this area of awareness and emotion is fear and anxiety. Can they experience fear and anxiety? It's another question that has been proposed to science and that science is uncovering. And I think that this one's really, really important to our conversation, like if they can feel pain. This is another one that's important to our conversation because ultimately, remember, our larger question here is, should we be killing and eating fish? Right? That's the bigger question here. And so do they experience fear and anxiety in the process of being caught and killed and eaten? Well, not eaten, but caught and killed. So, and it has been documented scientifically confirmed that fish do feel fear. They respond to dangerous situations the same as any animal. Their breathing gets faster, their heart rate increases. They release distress hormones and pheromones. They show signs of panic. They may flee or freeze or get bigger or change color. They have all kinds of defensive mechanisms. So that's from fear. And then after an incident of fear or anxiety, they'll often avoid the area where that occurred. And also they may stop eating for a while, just being in kind of a distressed mode physiologically. So again, fish do feel fear and anxiety. So, it can be kind of challenging for humans to kind of conceptualize and consider that other animals are sentient and conscious, have consciousness, especially fish. But in 2012, biologists and animal experts came together at a conference and they created what's called the Cambridge Declaration on Consciousness. And it stated really technically, so I'm going to kind of give a layman's interpretation of it, but they included fish as well as some non-vertebrates like octopus in this assessment. And what they said is that consciousness is almost undoubtedly present in the animal kingdom. Emotion is almost undoubtedly present in the animal kingdom. And consciousness does not require a big brain or a backbone or a vertebrae. So really fascinating stuff that we're learning in science. I encourage you to dig into it if you're into that kind of thing. It's really fun. Starting with Jonathan Balcomb's book is a great place to start.